All right, welcome everyone to the Earthwatch webinar series. We're going to get started. My name is Diana Eddowes. I'm a Senior Program Manager at Earthwatch, and I work directly with Dr. Ponce de Leon and her team on the project Conserving Wetlands and Traditional Agriculture in Mexico. First, just a little housekeeping. Just so you all know, all of you are placed on mute automatically to reduce background noise, and so the only voice you'll hear today are mine and the scientists. If you have any issues or troubles, please use the chat function on Zoom. And if you have any questions for the speaker, please put them in the Q&A option, and we'll answer those directly either via text or have the scientist answer them at the end of her presentation. We'll also be recording this webinar so others can listen that couldn't join today. So let's get started. As I mentioned, my name is Diana Eddowes. I manage the project in Mexico, and I've been working on this project since 2013, and it's gone through various stages, having one-day local teams to corporate teams to teacher teams, and of course public teams as well. And I think this project is really special for a few reasons. The people we work with, our partners at UNAM and Redes, are really fantastic. The research subject matter, which connects agriculture and urbanization and an endemic endangered species, the axolotl. And finally, the farmer communities that are so connected to this project and use the research to improve the way they work and do business. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Claudia Ponce de Leon. She is a faculty member at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, or UNAM for short, and she's in charge of the Environmental Analysis Unit and the Ecology and Natural Resources area in the Faculty of Sciences. She has a PhD from the University of Cincinnati and a master's degree from the University of East Anglia. She specializes in water chemistry and the effects caused by environmental stressors on aquatic organisms, communities, and ecosystems. She's been working with Earthwatch on this project since 2016, but has been working in the wetlands of Xochimilco for many years prior to that. Please welcome Dr. Claudia Ponce de Leon.
Hello to everybody. Thank you for letting me in your computers, and I hope you enjoyed this talk because I always love talking about my research. So anyway, just for a brief introduction. Sorry. Okay. This is the general slides you will be seeing throughout the presentation. So here on the top, you will know what you're watching. And on the bottom, you will see what section of the presentation you are looking at. So every time there's this red part, then you will see the part of the presentation you're looking at. It's just that my computer is going really, really slow. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. Okay. A little bit from the introduction of history of Central Mexico basin. It is a basin that was filled with different water type lakes. It had salty waters and it had fresh water. And due to the grand quantity of water, the Aztecs, the settlers, built a city on top of the lakes. And this was one of the big settlements, which was called Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City. And it had roadways on to the surrounding basin, and they had very little land. Sorry, it's just that I have to do it with my mouse and something's not working properly. Well, so since then, Xochimilco, which is located at the southeast of the basin, was an important agricultural settlement. And the origin of the chinampas was due to the scarcity of land in the lake system of Texcoco, Zumpango, Chalco, Xochimilco. And first, what they did was separate fresh water from brackish water dams and aqueducts and dikes. The construction and use of chinampa dates back to several thousand years. Even some estimates suggest that the first chinampas were built nearly 4,000 years ago. That's even before the Egyptians. So it's quite an old technique. The agriculture from pre-Hispanic times was highly productive, and the agriculture production reached a population of 2,000 people, which is a lot. Down here you can see more or less a depiction of how the chinampas look like in the Aztec times. In the early 16th century, the lake system had 100,000 chinampas with 3 to 10 occupants in each one, with an area of 1,500 square kilometers, which is the size of Houston. So you can imagine the size of this. And after the conquest in 1521, the population declined dramatically due to wars, slavery, and new diseases. So the population was reduced by 90%, that is to less than 30,000 people in what used to be the Great Tenochtitlan. In 1524, then the Spaniards introduced new plants and pets, as well as grains and European farming technologies. So that what happened was deforestation and intensification of agricultural work in areas of the Valley of Mexico where they were developed. So because of this desiccation, there was a reduction of the lakes in the Mexico City basin, and because of the urban growth in the 1930s, Xochimilco spring waters were diverted to supply Mexico City with water, and by the 1950s, the Xochimilco canal had to be replenished with wastewater. There was no more spring water. Down here, you can see how the urban growth throughout the years, and by 2000 there's very little left from the Great Lakes, and there's a lot of urbanization. You can also see here around all the mountains, so there's no more space to grow, and it really becomes a great basin which sometimes gets really flooded. So what is left of the Xochimilco lakes is from the 1,500 kilometers, only 23 kilometers are left. And our study site is this one over here, which is the one that resembles more accurately the traditional agriculture that was from the Aztecs. This is a photograph of what the Xochimilco area looks like right now. And you can see the canals over here, and this is all wastewater. So this wastewater has an impact on the ecosystem and on the agriculture, and that has to be studied. What happens is that water usage throughout the world is divided in mainly 3 uses: domestic, industry, and agriculture. And as you can see here, in what is the third world countries, Africa, Asia, and South America, wastewater is mostly used from agriculture. So if wastewater is used for the agriculture, that's a great usage of the water, but we still have to investigate what are the consequences in the agriculture and in the human health of the usage of wastewater. So what are the environmental pressures of the place we're studying? Okay, we have unregulated urban growth, land uses change, modernization of traditional agricultural practice, inputs of pollutants, chemicals, microbiological plant nutrients, which are nitrates and phosphates, oil and synthetic organochemicals, water synth proliferation, and sediment accumulation from soil erosion that comes from a lot of rainfall, and in moderate exploitation of the aquifers and because of the earthquakes, which give subsidence process. In this sense, we had a very bad earthquake just last year, and that had a great impact on the area. And here you can see some of the photographs of the consequences of the earthquake. A lot of subsidence in the area, and even some holes that were on the canals that it was just like a drain which drained the canals from the water. So, but we've been studying the system for quite a while, and so we asked when we proposed this project with Earthwatch, what do we know about the system? First, it's a closed aquatic system with very little circulation, which has consequences of very little oxygen in the area or in the water, organic carbon levels that are very high, carbon and nitrogen levels as well very high, nitrogen compounds that can poison the water with very high concentration as well. We've also studied pollutants in the water, and we have seen the presence of pesticides and metal that can impact water, sediment, and the biota, that is the organisms that live in there, especially the ajolote, which is an endemic creature that lives in the area. We also know that some of the pollutants down there exceed the maximum permissible limits from the Mexican norms. There is very high concentration of suspended particles, so there's no clear water, and that reduces the penetration of light, inhibits photosynthesis, and redirects the energy input. There's a lot of organic matter in the system, which traps a lot of the pollutants, and that controls the behavior of the contaminants. And the spatial distribution of metals and organic matter, for instance, it's not homogeneous throughout the canals, and it reflects special contributions. And that is a problem because then we have to treat each one of the canals differently if we ought to do something about the pollution. But nevertheless, it still gives a lot of environmental services. Like it's a redoubt of migratory birds. It has a peri-urban agricultural system, which is an economic system that is very sustainable. We have groundwater recharge. It has an historical value. It's still a very important urban lung for the great city. Wastewater usage can be used productively. It's still a recreational place, and it's a source for jobs. Okay, another important, environmental service is the presence of the axolotl. Like I've told you before, this is an endemic from the area, and it has very important scientific usage because it's a neotenic amphibian. That is, it always conserves its juvenile stage. It's an amphibian that are being used as bioindicators of environmental deterioration. That is, if something happens to the axolotl, that means that the whole ecosystem is suffering. It's endemic from the Xochimilco area. It's an endangered species, which we are trying to protect and try to reintroduce to the ecosystem. And it's a unique salamander that lives underwater. Sorry. It's just that this thing is not working. Okay. When we study water, there are a lot of parameters that we have to monitor in the water. As you can see here, I don't want to mention each one of them, but there are a lot of things that we have to be measuring when we go into studying the sites. And since there are so much things to do in there, then when we do this project with Earthwatch, it really helps when we recruit all the help. Here you can see some of the Earthwatch volunteers, and they are taking measurements as well as taking samples from the canals. And we don't only do it from one side. We have done it for over 50 different sites. So you can imagine measuring all those parameters in 50 sites. That's quite a lot. So having the help from the volunteers does really helps. This is another picture from another canal where we are taking all the measurements and the samples as well. You can see we are in the boats, and we have to really do a lot in a very little space. Also, once we have all our samples, it's really a problem because there's no way we can have the vehicles near the sampling sites, so everything has to be carried by foot. And you can see here that the roads or the pathways are really narrow, so we cannot even bring any kind of vehicle that will help us bring the samples back. So all the help that we can get carrying all this stuff, it's really helpful, if I might be redundant. So once we get all the measurements and the results from the laboratory, we get things like this. Every one of these little things that you see here are the results that we get. So the raw data can be really overwhelming, and you don't know exactly what to do with all this data. So graphs can help visualize the differences or trends more easily. Like, for instance, when we were measuring the difference in depth from the canal from one year to the other, we could see that the canals that were near one of the lagoons had the biggest difference from one place to another. And this graph, especially, we were comparing when before and after the earthquake. This is another graph. This is more like a map graph in which we can see that the places that have these biggest balls over here are the ones that have a conductivity above the recommended limit for agriculture. And they're not even near the urban area or near the lake area. So some other influences have been in here that we don't know exactly know what is it that is making this conductivity go so way up. We can also have statistical tools that can help make sense of the data. And for instance, this statistical analysis is telling us that there are, for instance, one factor is made out of temperature, pH, and oxygen, and that is making the biggest difference between the sites. Like I told you before, the sites behave differently, so we have to know what is making the difference between the sites. So how do we communicate water pollution? Because this investigation, we have to give the results to the farmers down there. They have to know what is the quality of their water. So how do we communicate with it is water pollution? So traditionally, water quality status is communicated by comparing the individual physical, chemical, and biological parameters with guideline values. These guideline values can be for human health or for ecosystem health, and they can be national or international, like the NOAA, the WHO, the EPA, or from various laws, regulation, or normativities normatives from the different places. So, but that would be a lot of problem to communicate it, each one of the parameters that we measure into the farmer. So what do? We are developing these water quality indexes. There are already several water quality indexes around there in the literature, with the scientific community, in which, for instance, you have one value that adding up the different parameters will give you a quality of the water. So there are different numbers of water quality indices, and so you have to choose which one you are gonna be using for in order to transmit this water quality. Or in our case, since we are combining not only human quality water, but also for the ecosystem, to see the quality of the water of the ecosystem, and as well for the reintroduction of the ambystoma. We are developed some water quality that it's going to relate to all that we want, and so that way we can transmit the information into the farmers and tell them, you know, this is has a quality for good agriculture, or not very good, but it's good to reintroduce the ambystoma or whatever. So that's what we're working right now together with the volunteers for Earthwatch. Another important part is the study of the biological studies, which is for instance, the study of some zooplankton that gives information of the viability of life in the canals. And we've already seen plankton in SpongeBob, and yeah, that's more or less accurate of what it might look like. So microzooplankton is smaller than 200 micrometers, and you can see here, for instance, this is a rotifer, and unfortunately, my animation is not working correctly, but it does resemble the head of Bart Simpson, and that's the way we tell our students that they can easily recognize the rotifers down there. Also, we use grids, so you can measure the abundance of the different zooplankton species. And so not only the abundance, but also the sizes of the zooplankton, because zooplankton can have different sizes and adapt to the environment. And so that gives us a lot of information of what's happening on the canals. Depending on the size and the abundance, it's going to tell us how healthy the canal is in order to sustain life. Over here, you can see as well, for instance, they started developing this tail over here. They develop in order to feed themselves, depending again on the environment. So plankton can transform itself and according to whatever variables of physical, chemical variables the water is suffering over there. When we have, for instance, low oxygen content, it only permits the development of this type of cladoceras, like the Phleroxus or the Alona. And if we see this kind of zooplankton, we know that the canals are lacking oxygen and will not be able to sustain living organisms like fish or axolotl, because there's very little oxygen in there. And on the contrary, if we see this kind of zooplankton over there, we say that it's better water quality, and it's going to permit the development of ambystoma, because this is going to be the food of the ambystoma, and it's going to grow and thrive in the canals. Another important thing is that in some, supposedly it was extinct, the axolotl in the canals, but when we started monitoring together with the Earthwatch volunteers, and we got a big surprise, and we were able to find some ambystoma. Not very much. We were able to catch about 6 ambystoma, but that really gives us hope that the ambystoma can really be reintroduced into the canals. And as well, Diana told you at the beginning that we are also working with the farmers, so that all the scientific work is also told to the farmers what we're doing and how that scientific work is going to impact their production. And so together with this association, we've been doing some business and environmental programs for the farmers. We've been teaching them how the pesticides and the use of artificial fertilizers can really impact the canals, which in turn will impact the ecosystem and their agriculture as well. So, for instance, one of our volunteers, well, farmer volunteers that has been attending to the program she is an elementary school teacher, used to be an elementary school teacher, and she manages various chinampas, and with the help with their watch volunteers, now she has a very prosperous and booming business because she has stopped using pesticides. So now she can really sell all her produce as an organic produce, which is very liked in several of the restaurants. Also, she is starting to do some ecotourism to make awareness of the importance of urban agriculture. Also, with the help of the Earthwatch volunteers, we were able to develop a group called Ecolittle, producing these vegetables and cactuses. And so they modified their mode of production, and now they can access the new markets, like the high-end restaurants from the affluent zone of Mexico City. And here you can see when they were delivering their produces, and they're actually very proud to be part of this movement of organic cuisine. Also, 2 farmer groups were identified as having great potential to provide ecotourism services, and they are being currently advised based on the EY's business development scheme. They also, the volunteers help them to develop their logo, as well as how to advertise themselves. And this summer, which was the vacations for all kids, they had their first clients, their first customers come and do some ecotourisms. So that has worked pretty nicely. And with that, I'll be able to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Claudia. So we've got a couple questions. There's 2 on the farmers themselves I thought you could answer. So one question was, have any of the farmers been successful in advocating for better water management or more water treatment plants in the area based on the data? Have you or Redes been involved in that, or have the farmers been able to make any change?
Well, there's the wastewater treatment plant that is supplying the water, And what we have found out is that most of the pollution that it's really degrading the ecosystem comes mainly from the chinampas. That is, what is the greatest problem is the death, which is caused by all the erosion of the soil from the neighboring chinampas that goes into the canals, and that makes the water not clear water, and that's a bigger problem than the pollutants themselves. So that was quite a shock, because everybody really thought that the main problem were the pollutants that were in the water, but rather the problem is that you have to really manage the edges of the canals, and that's what we've been telling the farmers. There are well, I don't know if you remember, I can maybe go back, and you can see here, these trees over here are special trees from the area, and they really consolidate the edges of the canals. So these trees have been having some plague, and that's been having a lot of impact on the edges of the canals. So what we have to do is better management of these trees, so that the edges can really stop all the erosion from the chinampas into the canals. And that will make a greatest impact before we go into the pollutants in the water.
Great, thank you. Another question was about the farmers themselves. Is it common for children growing up on the chinampas to take over the farms of their family, or are younger generations as invested in this type of sustainable farming as they have been historically? Have you seen any change as a farm may get handed over from an older farmer to their son or daughter?
Well, actually, no. That's a part of the sad thing, because usually now, uh, because they have better lives, their daughters and sons prefer to go to college and have office jobs. So, but what has happening is that a lot of the neighboring states, because of the violence, are migrating into the city, and the only thing they know what to do is farming. And so they have found in Xochimilco a place where they can farm without being hit by the violence. So it's not the sons of the owners of the chinampas, but rather farmers that are migrating from neighboring states that are taking over.
That's really interesting. Next question is actually about the axolotls. Can you talk a little bit more about the axolotls that you found in the wild, how many you think are left, and what the project is doing to try and reintroduce them?
Well, we have another problem that I didn't mention right here, is that we have tilapia and carpa, which tilapia mostly, which is an introduced species, and the tilapia eats the axolotl's eggs. So that's a big problem. We first have to get rid of the tilapia. Also, the axolotl without the tilapia, even though the canals are not in optimum conditions, we've seen that they can survive with no problem or little problem. So what we're seeing is where that tilapia is not present, we can reintroduce the axolotl, and we just have to make sure that there is enough food for them in order to thrive and really reproduce. So yeah, and again, it was surprising. It's not really due to the pollution, but rather maybe to the lack of food or the presence of the tilapia that it's causing the scarcity of ambystoma in the canals.
Great. Is there anything new that you'll be doing with the research next year with next year's Earthwatch teams based on maybe the data you've collected so far or just new questions that you have?
We're planning to make a map. First of all, make a map of the quality of the water. And with that, we're going to give them to the farmers. And with that information as well, we are going to pinpoint where are the best places we could make some real wetlands that could clean the water. Because you cannot put this kind of cleaning wetlands just in any place. You really have to make sure it has the right depth, the right circulation, and where it's really gonna make a difference. So that is one of the things we are planning to do next year with the Earthwatch volunteers, which will be a lot of hard work.
Great. Someone asked a question about was there any data gathered this year after the earthquake that helped to determine the impact of that earthquake on the chinampas?
Yeah, I didn't put all the data we got, but one of the biggest problems was the subsidence, that is the sinking of the chinampas. And we pinpointed some places as well where the amount of water was greatly reduced. And we're not sure, we're already working with geophysical scientists in order to determine as well which are the places that are more at risk of sinking completely. So we have the data. It was really fortunate that we had data on the depth of a lot of the canals, that we could cover a lot of land with the Earthwatch volunteers, and so we have a pretty good knowledge of the depth of the canals. And like you saw the graph, we could see which one were the places that have the greatest subsidence. And as well, some of the physical chemical parameters changed. We don't know exactly why they change. No, we don't really. We have some plausible explanations, but nothing we can really say is that cause it. But some of them, even the distribution of the zooplankton changed a little bit, but we cannot explain why yet.
Is there, related to that, is there anything that you've learned in helping to make the chinampas more resistant if there is another earthquake? Helping to farmers to, plant certain trees or support the sides of the walls of the chinampas better, so that if another earthquake happens, that maybe there will be less subsidence?
Definitely having the trees, the correct trees along the edges of the canals and also in the chinampas can make a difference in there. But other than that, I don't think there's much they can do. We are hoping that the infiltration of water will help a little bit to recharge the spring waters, and that help a little bit with the subsidence. But some other studies have to be done in order to determine how much water is really infiltrated to the underground water, to see if that's going to help a little bit with the subsidence or not.
Thanks. One more question. Just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about the EY partnership and the work that the EY participants have done over the years with the farmers in relation to the project.
Sure. It has been very interesting because they have really put themselves to help the farmers, and really it has even been touching with what the the EY volunteers have done. They started even with just designing like the logo, and then doing some pamphlets in order for them to distribute. They also done some accounting programs, small little accounting programs, so that the farmers can follow. And they even have found what are the kind of taxes they have to be dealing with. So it has been really, you know, from all the expertise of the different volunteers of the EYs. Everybody put it some part of their knowledge in order to have a comprehensive let's say business program for them. So it's been really interesting, and they work really hard. We've seen them working really hard.
Great. Thanks, Claudia. I think that is it for questions. So I just wanted to thank you for your time and for your excellent presentation, and to all the participants to join us today, and those that may watch this as a recording. We hope this presentation has inspired you to sign up for this expedition or another. We do have 2019 dates will be out shortly, so stay tuned. And as always, Earthwatch could use support to consider doing more webinars like this, and to support the research that we're doing in Mexico and around the world. So please consider donating to Earthwatch. And we'll be sending you a short survey out to all the participants after this to have you give us some feedback on the webinar and what you'd like to see more webinars on. So stay tuned for that. So thanks again, Claudia, and thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you.